One is that we are recording this session, and so we ask that that you do not make any recording, that the host will be recording the session. The other is that you keep your cameras on. And so I know that we have at least one individual who doesn't have a working camera, but everyone else needs to have their cameras on. Michelle has hers on and I have mine on, and we would just ask that you do so as well. As I said, we have lots of questions, and so if there's any time at the end, you can raise your hand and Michelle will answer those at the end of the session. Okay? So I'll give you just a moment. I think we're waiting on maybe one individual to cut her camera on, and then I think and a couple more joiners to get started. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and revisit those rules real quick. If you would, please cut your camera on. We all have our cameras on, with the exception of one individual who doesn't have a working camera right now. And if you would, please, if you have questions, you can raise your hand, and if there's time, we'll answer them at the end. Michelle, I'm looking to see. There you are. There you are. Good evening. I'm Janet Peterson, and I'm a retired teacher in North Carolina, and I'm glad that you're here. I want to start out by talking and saying that Michele Morrow and Mo Green are both candidates for the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the leader of our schools. Attorney Mo Green has been in leadership roles in Mecklenburg County and Guilford County. However, he's never been a teacher or an educator. Michele has had children in public school, homeschool, micro schools, and private, and she successfully taught at home and micro schools. Michele has been a champion for maintaining the innocence of children, spending time with legislators regularly, advocating for parents' rights, and the expectation that quality education should be available to every child in North Carolina. So Michele, why don't you open us up?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. Thank you, Janet, and everybody else that has set this up. I do want to just put a caveat. My folks just came in from the mountains. They've been up there and been without power and whatnot. So they just walked in the door, but I'm going to, we'll talk with them later. But if you hear voices in the background, that's them talking to my husband and my son. But I'm excited to be here. I know that this is a huge responsibility. I truly believe that education is the determining factor of where we go as a state and as a nation. I think we have an awesome task of preparing every young person to be able to pursue a career of their dreams and to reach their fullest potential. And I'm doing this because we need some outside common sense solutions. We need somebody with a different perspective who is going to join together the people of North Carolina, as well as the entities that are responsible, whether it's the General Assembly, the State Board of Education, the DPI, or our 115 school boards that are supposed to be serving the individual schools and classrooms. I think that there's been a breakdown in that system. And so I am wanting to be an advocate for our students first and foremost, and then for our teachers and our boots on the ground staff, who I believe should be at the center of every decision that we make, whether it's finances or curriculum choices or discipline or hiring or whatever it might be. And so that's why I'm doing this. I think that we can make our schools, our public education system, be the absolute best choice for every student in our state. And I think we have the means to do it. We just need to make sure that our priorities are in line.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we're glad your parents made it safely to Raleigh.
Yes,
There's
thank
a
you.
lot going on in the mountains.
Yes.
Yes. Our first question is a tough one. It says, many are concerned about your comments for explicit violence against public officials and your desire to put aside the Constitution for political gain. We teach children to accept responsibility for their actions. How can we trust you with our children when you make comments like that?
Well, first and foremost, I want to say these things are 4 and 5 years old, that were statements that were made on they were actually comments. They were not posts that were made. But I will say this, It was at a time when tensions were very high. You can go to my website. I have addressed this and answered this specifically. I will tell you, this was in response to the question, what should happen if someone is found guilty of treason? They were hyperbolic, they were exaggeratory, and they were facetious comments. And so, but this is the problem that I actually do see with this. These are not things that I am putting out. These are things that my opponent has been digging up. And they have spent a lot of time in going through probably 400 or 500 hours of videos to find things to take out of context. And this is my concern. My concern is we need common sense solutions to the literacy crisis, to the teacher shortage, to the increase in violence, to the fact that we have now boys that are allowed into girls' sports, into their bathrooms, into their locker rooms. We know that we have inappropriate content in our schools. We know that the money that should be being spent in our classrooms is being spent on special interest projects. It's going to bureaucratic bloat. It's going to people that do not have the best interests of our students in mind. And that is what we need to be focusing on. That is what I have been trying to talk about. These things have been, when I ran for school board 2 years ago, these things were brought up. This is not new news. And while I am responsible and apologize that those things, the wording was not good, I have to say, it is not me that is continuing to put this rhetoric in front of people. It is my opponent and it is the media. And our children should be protected from that. It should not be discussed in our schools. And that's part of the reason why I'm running. I believe that we've got to get focused on academics and get the politics and the social issues out of our classrooms so their children can learn and they can have their innocence protected and they can just be kids.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in public school and what made you to decide to run for superintendent, understanding that it's going to include a big budget with lots of rules and lots of regulations?
Absolutely. Yeah, rules and regulations. Nobody likes those things. But I will say, so I am a product of public school. I was in public school for my entire K through 12. I graduated high school in Charlotte, went on to UNC Chapel Hill. That's where I got my nursing degree. My husband went to public school out in Texas. His father and his brother were both in public education for 36 and 40 years. And we always assumed that our children would go to public schools because it worked for us. And I have 5 children and a daughter and 4 sons. My daughter actually was in public school for 4 years when we lived in Texas. Now she was born and ended up with congestive heart failure when she was just 6 weeks old. And we were living in Mexico at the time. And so she had some learning issues. So we went through the IEP process and the 504 and had the therapies and the tutoring and everything. And after 4 years of me actually volunteering in her classroom 2 days a week for 4 years, it just wasn't working. And at that time, she could not go to a private school because she did have learning differences and wasn't accepted. So I said, I'm going to just homeschool her for a year. And her brothers were still in school. Her 2 of her 4 brothers were in school at the time. And so I kept them in school, but then it just became to be too much. I couldn't do schoolwork all day long with her and then do homework with my children at night. And then we moved out to Colorado and we were in a very remote area. We were 30 minutes from the nearest town. And it just happened that we ended up homeschooling everyone. When we moved back to North Carolina 10 years ago, we had every intention. Okay, I don't have to do this anymore. I'm going to put them back in the public schools. We came in the middle of the year. And so we decided we're just going to finish out this year and then we're going to put them into school. But my children were involved in sports. They were involved in church groups. They were involved in scouts. And what I was hearing about what was happening in the middle schools that they were going to be attending at that time, I just did not feel comfortable putting them in that situation until I started investigating. And that's really why I started going to school board meetings and I started being involved. And what I was seeing was very disturbing. when I was in Charlotte, Wake County was one of the top school districts in the entire state. And as a matter of fact, 20 years ago, there was a 2 and 3 year wait list to be a teacher in Wake County. And so I was very upset about what was happening and what I was actually hearing at the school board. So I started speaking to school board members. I started talking to people in the General Assembly. And really, this has just gone on for about the last 6 or 7 years. And it was 2 years ago that I ran for school board, and I was not successful here in Cary, but I just said, this seems like a very top-down problem. This is not, we are not offering our children the same quality of education regardless of what zip code you live in. We seem to be under the control of individual school boards, and it's very much determinant what policies are going to be passed, what curriculum is going to be, offered, and what the environment is going to be in our schools, and that's on our school boards. And so I felt like we really need somebody at the top who is going to ensure that education and academics is at the top priority, that our students' needs are the #1 priority of every decision that we make, and in strengthening that relationship between teachers and parents. And I think the administrator's #1 job should not be making sure that we jump through the hoops so that we get this money, or we, are doing this project or making these bureaucrats happy. It should be creating a culture of civility and collaboration and enthusiasm and excellence in every school. And so that's when I just said, you know what, this can be done differently. And I'm willing to go in and serve the people of North Carolina and try to raise the bar of conduct as well as academic success and preparedness for our kids, and to be the voice of the people of North Carolina as to what decisions we want our elected officials to be making regarding the next generation.
Okay, good. Well, the next question has to do with your opponent. As you said, Mo Green has been putting out a lot of your videos. One of the questions that we received tonight is, what is the most concerning fact that you've learned about him? His approach towards the election has been very different from yours. And has he misled the public about you?
Yes, he absolutely has misled them about me, but I think probably even more concerning is how he has misled the public about himself. Many people don't recognize that when Mo Green was the attorney in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, he was placed as the deputy superintendent. And at that time, Charlotte-Mecklenburg was the largest school district in the state. And he was just placed into that position as deputy superintendent and had no prior history of being in a classroom or having any administrative history. And he was put in that position. And then he was moved after 2 or 3 years, he was moved up to Guilford County, stating now he has, experience within that superintendent's realm. And then he became the superintendent of Guilford County. And if you listen to any of the debates or the forums that we have spoken at, you will hear what he has said about his experience. Well, what he is failing to tell you is that when he was in Guilford County schools, he actually raised the graduation rate by 18 percentage points. The problem is there was no change in student proficiency. That means less than 53% of the students that were getting a diploma were actually reading or doing math at grade level. And that is an abject failure. We're failing our students if we are not equipping them to be successful as adults. That piece of paper means nothing if you do not have the intellect and the facts to be able to be independent on your own, to know how to go and fill out a job application, to know what it means to be taxes, to know what you want to do, and to feel like you're prepared. We need for our children to feel confident and to feel excited about their future, and not to be confused or to be fearful. So those are 2 things. The other thing that he wants you to believe is that he's just stepping right out of Guilford County schools, and he just wants to step right into this superintendent's role over the state. And nothing could be farther from the truth. For the last 8 years, he has been the executive director of a group called Z. Smith Reynolds. Z. Smith Reynolds has become one of the most radical political organizations in the state of North Carolina. And in fact, there are ties and there is proof that while he was in that executive director position, he funded groups that were promoting the riots that destroyed property, businesses, that left cars on fire, and that assaulted police officers in states around this, in cities around the state, as well as he was funding defund the police efforts while he was the executive director of Z. Smith Reynolds. In addition, as a lawyer, he was paying to get people that were doing this destructive behavior out on bail within 24 or 36 hours so they could move on to the next city. Here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. He is doing what he's told. He funded very destructive groups, and now those very groups are funding his campaign. So who do you think that Mo Green is going to answer to if he is the superintendent of public instruction? He has stated himself, the reason why he is running has nothing to do with students. He states that the system must be celebrated and that it must be fully funded. And his third point is that Roy Cooper asked him to run. That tells you a lot about why he is in this. And it also tells you a lot about why he is not focused on how he's going to solve the problems. Because I will tell you, he has yet to state any problem beyond the fact that I'm the problem and that the General Assembly is not giving us enough money. I can tell you right now, we could drop $1 million into every first grade classroom, and our students would not be able to read, and they won't be able to count it. Does money matter? Absolutely. But it matters most how we are choosing to spend it. And I am not beholden to any party, to any special interest groups, to any bureaucrats. I am beholden to the families of North Carolina to ensure that every student gets a sound basic education. And that's why I'm running.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm assuming much of this information can be found online about the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation and
Yes,
their grants.
yes, absolutely. Yep. And even on my website, there is a facts page that you can, and that's Morrow, the number 4, nc.com.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So our next question has to do with one of the things that you're accused of is not meeting with teachers and educators. Can you tell us about some of your meetings throughout the state? Specifically, what are the top concerns of the teachers and the parents that you're hearing throughout the state?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I have actually tried to get into schools, and that's not been very easy, especially since COVID. But I'll tell you that as I traveled the state for the last 3 years, and we've been having forums, and we've been asking teachers and families and people that are working within the schools, what do you see as the biggest issue? I've spoken with Best NC. I've talked with school board members from across the state, and I right now have people like Janet and many others, people that have been principals, people that have been in the DPI, people that currently are in the DPI, people that are elected officials on school that are school board members, people that I have a former UNC chancellor who is 100% on board with my plan moving forward and is willing to help. This is what's going to be important. We have got to bring together all of the people who have the expertise. I do not know all there is to know about education, but a good leader surrounds themselves with other people who are experts in their field. And we're going to need experts from all different areas. And one of the things I want to do first, if I am allowed to take this role, is we have got to start healthy communication. We need to build some bridges, because right now, even within the charter school community and the traditional school community, there is a lot of competition that isn't healthy. There is a lot of feeling like one is being chosen over the other. But this is where I see that there is something missing. We talk a lot about recruiting and retaining teachers. In order to bring teachers back into the school, into their calling, which I believe teaching is a calling, I think we need to go to the teachers who have left within the last 4 years, and we need to say to them, what can we do to change the atmosphere to bring you back into the classroom? Because we need you. We value you. Our children need you. And so that's something that I think, we talk a lot about the teachers want more pay, the teachers want more pay, and I am 100% on board. I've even talked ad nauseum with members of the Senate as well as the House committee about how we are going to increase that base teacher salary. And we'd like to be upwards above $50,000, upwards about $55,000 just as base pay. And we can do that. We can do that if we get all of these programs, all of these mandated trainings, all of these special interest groups, these pet projects, all of this stuff that is political in nature. If that will be removed from our school system and we can focus on our schools, we can ensure that the boots on the ground staff that are with our children every single day are the ones who are getting the first paychecks. And if that means we got to get rid of directorships, if that means we've got way too many people in the central office, if that means we have people that, have to do something else, then that's what it's going to take. So that's what I see as my role. I am 100% open. We have had Zoom calls every month since I won the primary for teachers, and we've offered that to teachers. I have been trying to answer emails. We've had everywhere that I've been on the schedule, welcoming people to come and speak. I have spoken at countless education forums, I think 8 or 9 of them. And as a matter of fact, last week I was just at a superintendent's meeting. I was graciously asked to come to that and address those superintendents in District 1 that are over on the eastern part of our state. I want for education to be enjoyable for everybody. And I think that we can get back to that place, but we just need to focus on what the end goal is. And I think that is student success across our entire North Carolina.
Right, right. Okay, so I want to talk about autonomy. Some teachers express concerns about the lack of autonomy. So many curriculums and programs have scripted lessons, and teachers are required to follow them. What are your thoughts about that? And can you also speak to Common Core?
Absolutely. Common Core, I know they started it with good intentions. The thought is if everybody's getting the same thing, then, no child is going to be left behind. I get it. But this is the problem with anything where the government is involved, quite frankly, is we start something and we think, this is going to have a good end point, but we don't ever reevaluate it and say, okay, has this met the expectations? Has this met the goal that we intended it for? And so as superintendent, one of the things I will be doing is I'm going to be looking at those programs that we've had on the books and we've just been doing it for this long, and this is just how we do it, and saying, if you cannot show us statistically that you have helped our children either in academic success, character development, or career preparedness, we need to cut that program and focus back on, I'd like to bring textbooks back into the schools. I think that gives our students and our teachers a lot more flexibility about how they're going to teach that content. I really would like to remove all of the handheld devices between kindergarten and 5th grade. I think our children are suffering from not having that face-to-face contact with their teachers. I also think that we are doing our teachers a disservice of the ability to be able to evaluate their children week by week. I think when they're just behind a screen and they're pushing a button, you don't really know what they have totally understood and whether or not they're able to move on. And so there's a lot of talk about the end of grades, and it's not fair because, we don't find out that they're really behind until you get back into April, and then you can't do anything about it, and then you're held accountable for that. Well, I think a pencil and a piece of paper helps us to know along the way. You can just walk around the classroom and see if somebody is understanding a concept or if they aren't. And then you can kind of readjust how you're going to handle that lesson plan moving forward. Or you can look for outside help if you have a student that just is not grasping it and you need for them to, have a resource teacher to help them in whatever that might be. So I think if we can get off of that screen and just that idea that, teachers are very creative. And I think we need to let their creativity. That's the wonderful thing about all of us have our favorite teacher, and that's because they put their personality right into what they were teaching. And we need to definitely allow that freedom. But at the same time, we need to empower our teachers. I think that we need to look at what's happening in our colleges and universities and make sure that we're actually giving our new teachers that ability to be able to think of different ways to teach the same concept to children that find themselves with different learning styles or different learning capacities. So there's a lot that can be done, but listen, At one point, the United States, we were #2 in the world for our public school system. And that was before we started the US Department of Education back in the late 70s. And now we are 43rd. And I think we can do a lot here in North Carolina. We have the expertise, we have the know-how. It's just about getting back to the students being the focus and allowing our teachers, empowering them, equipping them, supporting them, and giving them the tools they need to be able to see that every student is successful.
Right, right. Speaking of the numbers, our state is approximately 48th in the nation in state funding. This is a common area of concern when people are moving to North Carolina. How can North Carolina public education improve its opportunities and education system to compete with the desirability of other state school system? And that goes right along with what you were saying.
Right. Yeah, I think number one, though, what I have seen in different, I mean, when you're looking at the students or the teacher satisfaction surveys, when you're talking to places like Best NC and other places that have done polling of teachers and asked, what is your biggest concern? One of the top concerns is not having control in the classroom, having chaos in the classroom and not feeling like they are safe, not feeling like the disruptive students, that they have the backing of the administration, and just that frustration of that administrative bloat that is robbing our teachers of that classroom time that is precious with our students. And so there's a lot of things even beyond the pay. But as I said, we have got to ensure that our students, and I will say this, in some of these rural areas, in some of the harder to attract teaching positions, I think we need to increase the pay for those. When we're talking about special needs students, we are really we are so in need of special needs teachers, and so we need to be paying those people more. If you're in a rural area and you're married and there really is not another job opportunity for your spouse, are you going to be able to stay there and spend years investing in the students in that system? I say you aren't. So we need to look at that and work with even the local counties and talk about what their spending is going to look like too, and the percentage of their spending. Because some of these poorer areas, those counties are spending less than we're spending in a very wealthy county like Wake County. And so there's a lot of ways that we can do this and we can manage it. But one of the big things is we've got to get rid of the waste. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of money that is being spent on things that are not helping our students, that are not helping our teachers, that are not focusing on that classroom instruction. And that's what I'm hoping to do, to get in there and really do an audit and to talk to the boots on the ground and to figure out how we can streamline education.
Yes. Can you give me an example of how accepting federal funding for something, or perhaps some district misusing money when it went awry? Can you think of one?
Sure. Yeah, I talk about this. So in the 2022-23 school year, most people don't know that the only federal funding, the only percentage we get is about 10%, a little less than 11%. I think it's 10.4% of the funding comes from the federal government for our individual districts. Now, that's not counting ESSER funds, right? That was over and above because of COVID. But when you look at that here in Wake County, for instance, in the 22-23 school year, we received $2.1 million in grant money from the federal government, and 1.3 million of that was spent just on the salaries of DEI staff. The DEI staff that we were mandated to have in order to get that federal money. So you and I all know that often even the benefits package is more expensive than the actual salaries. So you look at that, 1.3 million out of 2.1 million was spent just on 8 people's salaries. And so what I'm saying is that was just one mandated program, one mandated directorship. And so if we get into brass tacks and start looking at, okay, what are we mandated to have by the federal government and what is it costing us? We are going to find that we are paying out of our state funding and out of our local funding for the mandated positions and the mandated programs from the federal government. And that's just one example.
So you're talking about mandated programs as well as staffing.
Yes.
Okay, let me move on to school boards. How can our local school board of education members be more involved in discussions at the state level that affect our local school districts?
Well, this is really what I'd like to see. North Carolina is broken down into 8 different regions, and that's usually the superintendents coming together of those 8 regions and talking. I would really like that to be expanded to school board members, to teachers, to principals, so that we can kind of get on the same page. I think we need to get together in that region and determine for each one of these districts, what are your top 3 needs? What are the top 3 goals that you're going to have, let's say for the 25-26 school year, right? Because we'll start talking about that in the spring of 25. And let's say you have so many failing schools in your district, right? Let's look at a parallel district that has very similar demographic, potentially very similar socioeconomic status. And do you have any districts that have been successful in helping to raise those schools up above into the C and B range? Then let's say, okay, can you kind of mentor these districts and tell them what you did? We shouldn't be just doing everything in kind of a solo of this is my school, this is my district, this is my classroom. We've got to make this be much more of a team effort. And I think communication is key. And that's where we're going to find the excellent things that are happening in public education. And we're going to be able to duplicate that across the entire state, because there are some excellent things happening, but it seems like it's just in little pockets, and we need that to be expanding to everybody. And so I think that that's when they would be able to have kind of a voice at the table. And if I'm there, I'm going to be, trying to just create better communication systems. And I would definitely have people in the DPI who are just there, that are communicating with our individual regions and with our individual districts and with our school boards and with our principals. Because, the superintendent is kind of the last one to hear about the problem, right? I mean, usually people go to the principal, and then if they don't get the answers, they go to the school board, and then the school board, goes up to their superintendent, and then the superintendent often brings it to the superintendent of all public education. And so we really need for that to be, if I don't have the power to change something or to fix something, I'm going to find the person that does, and I'm going to be the mediator between them, because that's what it means to be an advocate.
I appreciate those answers. I know on our last meeting, we talked about right many of our counties in the eastern part of the state have high poverty rates. Even though it appears that they receive more money, they have infrastructure needs. And we talked about many of them have failing schools. So increasing that communication sounds great. If we lose the governor's seat, the Democrats will have control over choosing the State Board of Education. What would be your strategy when dealing with a progressive Board of Education?
Well, the State Board of Education, really their function is to write policies that are in line with the laws that are passed from the General Assembly. So I intend to have a policy writing group within the DPI, so that we can ensure that the policies that we're actually handing to the State Board of Ed are great policies that we can then, because the DPI writes the standards. So the General Assembly sets the law, the State Board of Education sets a policy, and then the DPI sets the standards, and then they go down into the individual school boards, and then they determine what they're going to take and what they're not. And they have the ability to tweak it. Here is one of the problems. Currently, the State Board of Education is receiving their policies from the State School Board Association. The State School Board Association is a very left-leaning entity. And so they are handing our State Board of Education the very same policies that they're giving to California, that they're giving to Illinois, that they're giving to New York. And it's up to our state board to determine whether or not they're going to tweak it or not. And as a rule, they have not been doing that. So as the person that will be the chief administrative officer of the State Board of Education, I'm going to ensure that every policy that they're getting is a great policy. So it's not going to matter which one they vote on, A, B, or C. They're all going to be excellent, and they're all going to be with the intent of upholding the law completely, not only the letter of the law, but also the intent of the law that's coming out of the General Assembly. And also, the bully pulpit does have its benefits. So if they are making decisions, and I'm going to put it out to the people of North Carolina to say, this is your state board of education. These are the policies that they're considering. What is your opinion? What do you want them to do? Because that is what we're supposed to be doing. Elected officials are supposed to represent the desires of the citizens of North Carolina.
Very good. How do you plan on increasing pay for school teachers and staff? And give us your thoughts on teachers, instructional assistants, and support staff pay. And I know you mentioned about some of those difficult to fill positions like teachers in the special ed program.
Yes. Yeah, well, I totally think that when we get in there and we start getting down into the weeds of where our money is being spent, we're going to find that there is a lot of money that's spent administratively. You know, I tell you, DPI itself has tripled the number of directors in the DPI. And as a matter of fact, they have gotten 50 and 60% raises, some of them in the last 2 years. And that is not acceptable. It's not acceptable for our teachers to have to be working 2 jobs or to be paying out of their pocket for resources in the classroom. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of people in administration who have doctorates and have positions, and they like having that position because it is a position that is respected. But if you are not doing something that is purposefully helping our teachers and our boots on the ground staff, then I don't think we should be paying you a 6-figure salary. The other thing that I will say is this: we are spending a lot of money on giving our children iPads and Chromebooks. And I just don't think that that is necessary for the kindergarten through the 8th grade. I think that we can have computer labs. We can have, you know, a set of a few computers within the classroom setting if we want to do that for research purposes for the older children. But that is hundreds of thousands of dollars that we are spending every year in order to get those into the hands of our children. And then you have the IT staff. And then we were actually paying out of our budget here in Wake County to expand the 5G network. That should not be on the education budget. We need to find the things that are not education related that we are paying for out of our schools, and we need to get rid of them and put them onto other programs. For instance, DHHS has a lot of control in our schools, and yet we have 4 and 5 elementary schools that are sharing 1 nurse. Okay, so but we're spending a lot for SEL. We're spending a lot for Castle and for doing all of these evaluations on our students. We are paying another entity to be doing that for our students. And so as the superintendent, I actually will be looking at those contracts, and any contract that is more toward a political or a social or a medical focus is going to be looked at getting rid of that, because I do not believe that we should be replacing all of the community services within our schools. I think we need to focus on academics, and that's where the money needs to start first and foremost.
Yes. So you're talking about lots of programs. You mentioned SEL. And we know that teachers have been having a lot of staff development in various areas, one of them being critical race theory, or CRT.
Mhm.
How do you plan to remove CRT from the classroom? And how can we ensure that immoral and indecent language also doesn't enter the classroom? Those are really 2 separate things.
Yeah, 2 separate things. But I'll say this, we have a lot of development that is not talking about teaching kids how to read and write, and, you know, being able to manage a classroom and being able to help students and figure out ways to teach concepts in a different way for children with different learning issues. We have a real problem with early detection of a lot of our children that have learning differences. Those need to be the focal point, I think, of all of our staff development. We do not need to be asking our teachers to be uncovering their unconscious bias. Or, I mean, if you have to teach an adult adult how to be kind to a student and not to pick people apart according to their differences, I don't think they would be in teaching if that needed to be taught. And so I think we're wasting a lot of time, we're wasting a lot of money, and we're doing that because we have federal mandates, because we have groups that are coming in and they're saying, listen, if you'll do this training, we'll give you this curriculum. Right. And then what we're finding is our curriculum's changing every 3 years, right? So as soon as the teachers figure out, how to get their feet underneath them so that they're learning how to teach this new curriculum, all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, now they want us to pay so many millions of dollars for that curriculum. So we're going to go to the next person that's offering us a free curriculum, right? As long as we do this training and as long as we do this. And so that is part of the problem is we have too many lobbyists that think that they have great ideas and that they're kind of using our teachers and our students as guinea pigs for these newfangled educational ideas. And I think we need to get back to what we know works. And I think that's one of the ways that we're going to do that. The other thing is the General Assembly had considered, and it had passed in the House, it had sat in the Senate, an excellence in education bill. And that was going to be that any curriculum, any trainings that we're doing is going to be focused on pro-American values, not dividing people up by the color of their skin, by their gender, by their lifestyle, by their politics, by their culture, and really focusing on having a more united curriculum that's going to be much more positive focus, I think, rather than finding what we all have differences in. Not that we shouldn't celebrate differences, but finding a common ground. And I think that would be important but the other thing is curriculum. I mean, the curriculum, I know that individual school boards and then the schools themselves can pick what curriculums they're using, but I think that the DPI should be offering everybody an excellent, here's 4 options of really great curriculum that is proven. And here's the other thing that's a difference. There's a difference between research-based and results-based. Research-based says, okay, these are the 5 elements that you need for somebody to be able to read well and good comprehension and good spelling and whatnot. And they say, well, and this curriculum has all 5 of those entities, so it must be a good curriculum. That's research-based. Results-based is we've used this curriculum for so many years for children across all the learning spectrum, and every single one of them has seen incredible results. That's research-based. So that's what we really need to be focusing on, especially when you're looking at that ELA curriculum, that math curriculum for those K through 5 grades. We have got to ensure that no one leaves 5th grade until they have mastered reading, writing, and math, because we know that that is the foundation of all higher learning. So I will be going through and finding the people like you all that have been teachers that have had successful programs. We need to look at what states, what countries, in fact, have the best math programs, which have the best science programs, which have the best ELA programs, and just incorporate that and say, okay, we don't need to recreate the wheel. Let's just use this because it's been so successful here, here, and there. And so I think that as somebody, I want to give you all the choices, you all the tools, and you all the options. And as I said, just like with the State Board of Education, if we give you an option of 5 things for 1st grade ELA, and they're all excellent options, then you get the autonomy within your school district to determine what you're going to use year by year.
Okay. So you're focusing on evidence-based curriculums. It sounds like to me more than
Yes.
research is great, but evidence, you're really
Yes.
looking for the proven track record. Recently on your candidate comparison information that you shared, you addressed suspension of teachers' licensure for pending felonies in school systems. Tell us what you were thinking with that information about the suspension of a teacher's license.
Well, many people don't know, but when the current superintendent got in office, in the last 2 years, there were 67 teachers that were accused of sexually assaulting students. And for a very long time, over a year, they still had active licenses, which means that while they were awaiting their court date, they were able to still be in the presence of students. Now, I believe 100% that someone is innocent until they are proven guilty. That's why I would say, but we have got to put our students' safety absolutely first. And so I, just like a police officer, if they have been involved in something, they are suspended with pay until it can be adjudicated. I think the same should happen with our teachers. And as the superintendent, I would be responsible for that statewide database, ensuring that if a person has been accused of something, that their license is suspended, so they cannot just go on to a different district. They can't move in to a different state and say, oh, well, I'm just choosing to move. I'm just choosing, to change jobs, and they can potentially put our students at risk. And so that is what I'm saying. It is our duty to ensure that our students and our staff are safe.
That's reassuring. Some questions regarding parents. How can you and the state address the needs of children that are victims of Hurricane Helene? In addition to the school closures, of course, they've missed that time and schools are beginning to reopen. How can we support students that have no home, no clothing, and in some cases, no family?
I know, it's tragic, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is really going to be a long-term issue. And as we move into this election, we have to recognize that the leadership, this is probably going to be over a decade of rebuilding what has been destroyed in Western North Carolina. The North Carolina Baptists Federation, as well as Samaritan's Purse, they're doing incredible work. And so I think we need to partner with them. I have actually already contacted a couple of different curriculum producers and said, would you be willing to give math and English language? Would you be willing to donate those textbooks for these students? Because I think it's important that we at least get them into some semblance of normalcy. I think we've seen an outpouring with churches and with the schools. We should be very proud of how the schools have served the community to the best of their abilities. But this is going to be a long time coming, and we are going to see that in these surrounding areas, these districts, we are going to see families moving in. And it's going to be important that we reach out to other community organizations that are serving these families. This is a traumatic issue that is going to continue. And so we have to be aware of that. And we need to be helping our students to be able to process this as they grow and as they mature, because it's going to manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And so I think we are going to need to, I think as the DPI, we're going to need to go to trauma services. We're going to need to reach out to places, even if it's other places around the world where they have helped communities to overcome and to rebuild after these tragedies. And we're going to need to bring that in and offer those services to families, as well as to teachers, as well as to our students. And so that's going to be something that is another added focal point that probably was not on the table before that Hurricane Helene hit us.
Yes. Yes. So you've talked in other sessions about vouchers. And the main question that we have about vouchers is, how do we support low-income folks that really have no choice? So if they would qualify for a voucher, they really don't have any choices. There are no choices there.
You mean because there's no school availability, like there's no seats in the schools?
Their public schools are their only choice.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. And that's, there's been a lot of questions and there's been a lot of this statement, oh, we can't give opportunity scholarships. We can't give, we can't have vouchers to go somewhere else because that's taking money from the traditional public school system. And most people don't recognize this, but there are 37 districts right now in North Carolina that have 0 charter schools. So essentially, if you have your student in a school, let's say they're being bullied or they're just not getting the services that they need and they're not, advancing academically or socially or emotionally, do you want them to have to remain in that school? Because there's no other option. And so that's why the opportunity scholarship started, is for specifically those 37 districts that had no other option. And there are private schools in those areas. I will say this with the caveat. I think that they should have absolutely put a cap on who should be able to receive an opportunity scholarship. If you're making $500,000 a year, you don't need any help from the state to be able to get your kid into a private school. That's first and foremost. But then I think those 37 districts have got to be the priority. Here's the problem, though. Most of our private schools right now have a 2 or 3 year wait list. So our children that are already find themselves 2 or 3 years behind in their math or their reading proficiency, we don't have another 2 or 3 years to wait for them to start getting a quality education. And that's part of one of the reasons why I'm running for this, because we have got to make the public school system be the absolute best it can be so that it is there for everyone. Parents would much rather bring their child to a public school than have to go through and jump through all the hoops of filling out the paperwork and waiting in a lottery and, and doing everything that's necessary in order to try to get their child into something where they're actually getting a quality education. And that's why I'm doing this. I believe that when we get back to the basics, when we focus on safety and discipline, when we are improving the academic performance and the opportunities for our students, people are going to flood back in to our public school system. And then that's going to make every school system better, because then the charter schools are going to have to compete for our students and our teachers, and the private schools are going to have to compete for our students and our teachers, right? And that's the wonderful message of the free market system, is when you have healthy competition, you end up getting the best product at the best price. But I'll promise, there's a reason why tens of thousands of parents and teachers are leaving the public school system. And I think they would come back if they felt like their student was going to be served, their student was going to be safe, and the teachers felt like they were actually freed up to teach.
Thank you. I had one last question, because I know we're closing in on our time. And you've addressed some of this. Literacy and the lack of proficiency in both reading and math is our biggest concern. Well, that along with safety, which we really haven't covered tonight.
Yeah.
Can you share your ideas for closing the gap in reading and math? Any additional ideas?
Yeah, I had the honor of speaking with Dr. Conway down in South Carolina. He's a neurodevelopmental specialist, and he has a program, and it's called the Now Project. And he has been incredibly successful in finding students that end up having a propensity toward literacy issues, whether it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, any of these things, because it does have a genetic predisposition. And there's a very easy 40-minute assessment that can even be done in the pediatrician's office that can determine, that someone might be headed toward that struggle. And I think that we need to incorporate that into every pre-K program. I think that we should even expand how we are doing testing for our children, especially in kindergarten, first and second grade, before they're even coming in August. I think we should be using the central office staff, using teachers, using our special ed staff to be able to do these, 40-minute evaluations. And then we need to take what they've done with the Now Project and actually assimilate many of these programs where you're actually helping the children who might have a learning difference, but you're incorporating the treatment for it, right? The modality into all of the classroom. So that's keeping kids from having to be pulled out so much, because you're then reaching all of the students where they are if you just do these little tweaks. They've had incredible success, and he has told me that he would come up and even do trainings for our teachers, trainings for our principals, and so that we could use that system, and we can kind of get ahead of it before it's an issue. So that's really talking about more the literacy side of that in terms of English and reading and comprehension. But when we're talking about math, it is imperative that we return to facts-based objective math. Our children in that grammar stage between kindergarten and fifth grade, they are just they absorbers. We need to teach them the arithmetic facts, that we need to teach them percentages and how to tell time and how to count change and all of those things that are the basis for all higher level math. We've got to go back to that one objective course that we take, which is mathematics. And I think that that's going to help our children, especially the children that do have learning differences, that are much more concrete learner, that struggle with the abstract. We've got to stop talking about math theory, and we need to start talking about math facts.
That sounds great. I see that we are just about out of time. I'm looking to see if there are any additional questions that we might have time for? You've covered a lot of ground tonight, Michele. I think we're good. I just want to say thank you. This is difficult. Running for office is difficult. And then when you get there, the job is going to be huge. And we appreciate your willingness to serve. I mean, you had a comfortable life before, and you're willing to upset the apple cart and to do something about our children in North Carolina. And we appreciate that. Some of the in place of questions, we had comments from people who were appreciative of you running and for the job that you're willing to do for our state.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it. If we didn't get to your question, oh, somebody's waving a hand. Rocky, is that you? Rocky? Can you cut on you have time for Rocky's question, Michele?
Yeah, hey Rocky.
Can you cut on his or unmute his volume? Rocky, can you hear us? He can hear us. We'll give him just a second and see if he can get some volume.
And I just want to tell everybody too, thank you for being on while he's getting himself set up there. And we are, I think, going to do another one of these next Sunday. So if you have people that wanted to, ask a question, but please also, you can always email me. I also do give out my phone number for people to talk about things, not to the general public, but if you email me first, and I feel like that's a safe thing, I'm happy to meet you. But really, I think we have an incredible opportunity right now. I think that across the board, everybody is wanting to change some things. And so I think that that's one of the great things. If we can get somebody in there that's going to be about coming together with all the great ideas, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, if we can just focus on our students and focus on making our schools a place that everybody wants to be in the morning, and bringing fun back into education. I'm like, this does not have to be drudgery. Like, this is not
Absolutely.
accounting, or whatever it might be. I think that we need to infuse joy back into this process, and hope and purpose for our students. We have some of the most anxious and the most depressed and the most confused children that we've ever had. And that's not okay. And so I think we can do a lot to improve their outlook and improve their future.
I agree. Thank you. We know that if we keep going the direction we're going, using the same strategies we've been using,
right,
we're going to keep getting the same results.
That's
it's
right.
Time for a change. Rocky, do you have any volume yet? Almost.
I can't hear you.
I can't either. I think that Rocky's going to have to send us a message. Rocky, can you email us?
Or put it in the chat.
Or put it in the chat. And well, I don't know if the chat's open tonight.
Okay.
I think Rocky is just going to have to send you. Oh, that's our time. Sorry, Rocky. Rocky, send Michele a message. Visit her website, michellefornc.com, and go out.
Rocky's my buddy. He's my secret weapon down in New Hanover.
Great. Go out and vote for Michele. Don't forget to vote up and down the ticket. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys.